Buckle up, Camp Pros, and get ready to launch into the future of summer camp with Camp Ahead. Camp Ahead helps Camp Pros think about the future so they're not caught off guard. Climate mitigation, heat, gender, war, demographics, economics, artificial intelligence. Are we ready as an industry? Camp Ahead, exploring the futurology of the summer camp industry. You can find our contact information and the many show notes from each episode at gocamp.pro/campahead.
Is creating your camp schedule a headache? Does it limit the experience of campers or staff? Campify is the software that does the heavy lifting for you, taking care of group, elective, and specialist scheduling based on your custom scheduling rules. Interested in learning more? Visit campify.io/campahead to schedule a demo or create a free trial today.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to episode 4 of Camp Ahead, a podcast where we are looking at the future of camping and possible scenario planning for what that may look like. My name is KJ Williams. I am the Chief Program Officer and Camp Director at Phantom Lake YMCA Camp.
And my name's Joe Richards. I'm the Executive Director at Pearce Williams Summer Camp and Retreat Facility, which is part of the United Church of Canada's camping network. And we're located in Ontario, Canada, about halfway between Detroit and Toronto.
Hey there, I'm Jess Elfring-Roberts. I'm the Executive Director of Episcopal Camps and Conference Centers, which is an association of about 110 Episcopal camps, conference centers, retreat centers, and farms across the world. And I live in Chicago.
Today, we were talking about analyzing the implications of scenarios, the idea of how to look at a scenario and what implications it may have for you, but also the more you think about it and the more scenario playing that I've done with other people, the longer you stay in that space. And by longer, I don't mean like days on end. Even for 5 minutes a day, for a couple of days, you start to think of things that you would never have thought of, and what those implications are and how interconnected things can be. I know we talked just before we recorded about doing a more positive scenario this week on our discussion. And so we are going to be discussing a scenario. Who wants to set up the scenario? Somebody give us an example and we can build on it.
Sure. Let's say you had a new family to summer camp this summer, a camper family. The camper had an amazing time, and are wealthy and decided my camper had such a great time at summer. We would like to donate $500,000 to camp as an in-kind donation. Do with it what you will.
Awesome.
Man, my brain went to, I'm just throwing it out there. Someone dies and
I
they
was trying to stay positive.
And they leave $1 million to your camp.
I think that neither of you have gone really big enough. I think that somehow, and I was going with the camper parents, what if it wasn't $500,000 one time? What if they so believed in camp that was a yearly gift?
Oof.
Right? What if? And these are the scenarios that oftentimes camp directors will play with in their head, but very rarely speak out loud, right? Like, I want $500,000. I'm going to tell you a brief story. I always tell my staff, when you're touring people around, and if the groups say, well, when are you going to do, if you get to talking about a project that we're thinking about doing, and they say, when are you going to do it? The phrasing is, as soon as somebody gives us, $1 million, if you know anybody who has $1 million to give, feel free to tell them to come on out and we'll give them a tour of camp. The reality is that you don't know who you're with. Right? Like you never know who you're walking around with. And there's a true story about a camp near Windsor, Ontario, just across from Detroit, where that was a line that the camp director was giving when she was walking people around. Well, if we had, $1 million, we would improve this, improve that, improve this. And lo and behold, one day she doesn't know it, but she's walking around the owner of a giant greenhouse complex who grows a ton of vegetables that are in a year-round greenhouse. And like by giant, I mean thousands of acres. And he comes back a couple of months later and says, hey, here's what I want to do. I want to refurbish all of your cabins. I want it to be this project for our company. We're going to name them after our varieties of cherry tomatoes. So every cabin is a different variety. And you never know. And
Mhm.
and are you ready? Right? That's the question. So whether or not we're talking about $500,000 once, whether we're talking about $1 million, whether or not we're talking about a yearly gift of 500,000, these all set up a bunch of scenarios. So what is first setting the stage? What is your first reaction when somebody comes with a large donation?
I think like the first reaction that many people have is, ooh, we need something shiny and new,
Mhm.
right? It's not necessarily the deferred maintenance or, oh gosh, we really need a new water heater for the pool or what, it's that we had this dream and this desire to do this thing. And so we want to do that. And our brain and our heart goes to there.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, initial reaction, right, is gratitude, is appreciation, is thankfulness. But I think Jess is completely right. It's most people go, oh, a new building, or a new pool, or a new whatever, big fancy object.
And
Mhm.
don't get me wrong, those things are important and your center or your camp might need those things. I often find working with directors and organizations when I say, okay, if money were no object, what would you do? And people
Mhm.
start to come up with ideas, but then come up with these, no, we can't do that because of XYZ. And they can't even dream. Like that's just not a possibility. And even having the conversation of, okay, what if somebody did give you $1 million? It's like something in our brains in the nonprofit world shuts off and it's like, well, that's just not even possible. And I think that this future scenario planning really pushes us to say, okay, just say it is possible. Stop saying no. Like, let's just put that away and
And
say this
yeah.
world is real right now.
And remember, we're thinking 10 years into the future. So 10
Exactly.
years from now, if somebody gives you a 500, if you somehow form a relationship that is a $500,000 gift every year, that's a scenario I can get behind because what has changed in the next 10 years for your facility, and what can you start to do with the planning of $500,000? Right? If your budget is, my budget is, $700 to $800,000 a year for Pierce Williams. Well, $500,000 is a huge chunk of that we could use to do a wide variety of things because it's not just the capital. And I would think 10 years from now, my hope would be that I've done a capital campaign and so these are some of the thinking I have, right? Is that I've done a capital campaign. What community outreach can I do with a donation of that nature that I know is consistently coming of $500,000 every year with very few strings attached? Because strings are always going to be the question. But if we're thinking positively, it's a free and clear donation, meaning that there's no limitations on it. And if we're analyzing the implications of scenarios, the first thing it does is it frees. I think something like that frees up your imagination. I think all of the freezing we do right now, when people talk about big things like that, I think that once you know that it's coming, you're like, oh, well, then I can do this, 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 and this. So that implication is that it actually takes your creativity and gives you more free license on it.
Mm. Have you ever been in a room with a group of newer staff and sat there and they're like, oh, if I was running camp, I would do, and they just come up with these amazing ideas that are, they're not like necessarily groundbreaking or like cost that much money, but their brains, I see campers and I see the way we're doing things with community building. And I have these ideas. And if I could run camp, I would do X, Y, and Z. And I love hearing those conversations because I think, okay, if these are the dreams and these are the things you see because you are on the ground, right? How do we make them happen? And so I just love the idea that we can get so creative if we can get rid of that block and put it away, getting that piece, if that makes sense. And I just love the creativity of folks who think, I love this place, and what if we could do this differently or bigger? And then how many more people could this expand to?
How many more people could grow to love this place?
Yeah.
Totally.
And
Yeah, I
KJ, as a program person, like, how do you think about this? Because that gives you a different perspective.
Yeah, it's a completely different perspective, right? Like, I'm not a CEO, I'm not an executive director. And so
Yet,
big things yet, right? So big things like budgetary and facilities, that's not my area of expertise. I'm their boots on the ground with that summer staff that says, well, I would make this program and I would do this activity. And so when I think of a $1 million donation, I'm like, holy cow, that's a lot of crayons for the craft shop, right? So this ability to dream that we've talked about in the past couple episodes is so astounding and almost overwhelming, with opportunities that could come from even a $200 donation at my level, right?
So let's take one of these. Let's pick something, right? And kind of go through the implications, the things that the impact it could have, right? Let's take, what do you want to take?
I would like
I
to take
love-
the idea of like a consistent donation every year. So let's
Yeah.
call it, are we good with $500,000 every year?
Great.
I am great with that.
Yeah, I'll take that.
Okay, so here's the thing. Let's talk about budgetary changes there. I think that it just frees, as someone who thinks about money a lot in my role, I just stop. I don't need to worry as much about it. Right? The concern would be for me as the executive director would be that other people almost come in too hot with their freedom ideas and want to spend it all. Whereas in my mind, the best thing to do would be to take, and this is just old guy, no, maybe it's not old. This is just smart. In my mind, take 400 of the 500 and you can spend it, and take 100 and put it into investments. So you're growing an endowment fund as you go, which allows, and I would catch up on deferred capital first, or take a portion for capital and a portion for program. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think it's, I often think about this because I think about, we're an association. And so we have membership dues, and I would love, like, my dream would be to have an endowment that I could give mini grants out to do the type of work that centers don't have money for. So like, someone needs to build 3 new cabins. Someone needs to fix a furnace. And, the things that aren't necessarily in your budget, but you need them to happen. Sometimes it's an emergency thing. I would love to be able to have guaranteed income that would go just towards doing those things, so that people wouldn't have to worry about one little thing. But definitely, if we knew that we were going to get $500,000 for the next 20 years or whatever it was, it definitely makes it different than thinking through, like, we're going to get it for 3 years, right? Because then you're thinking, okay, how much do I need to put into an endowment if I know that we're going to be getting it? How much, or do we put in every year we save $100,000 for something bigger that we can then, put towards building a new building, or put towards reinvesting back in the community, a part of it.
We live by the 4 S's on our camp as a leadership team: safety, satisfaction, stability, and service. And so my brain automatically, from a programmatic perspective, goes, okay, stability is safety is number 1, right? Is everything we have safe on camp? We have a big accessibility program on our camp too, right? There's dreams of putting a wheelchair ramp into the lake. There's dreams of making things more ADA accessible or compliant, right? What is this safe? What are the areas where we're not the safest, and how can we advance those? And then hitting stability, satisfaction, service, and what falls into those. I think that's up for debate, right? There's a lot of different realms of what that could be.
Mhm.
But I also love what Jess said about, a 10-year project. Where are we putting this other source of income? Is it going into an emergency fund? Is it going into a 10-year project, a 20-year project, especially if we know that influx is still coming year after year?
Mhm. And also with that, with even the things we're talking about, you have to think, how is this going to impact day to day? Well, if we know we have this influx of money, do we have the bandwidth on our staff to be good stewards of the money? And so part of that might be hiring another person. Our organization is not a grant organization, so I would want to make sure we had somebody who was really good at understanding how, grants work and things like that if we ended up choosing to do that, and trusting them to do that because I'm the only other full-time person on my staff.
Mm.
So, I don't want to be spread this thin. But then, you think about staffing, then you think about and how much of percentage of the budget is going to go towards those things.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I often think about, and in a scenario like this, I think through the idea of what's going to last the longest, right? So from a program side or from a capital side, and I do this currently. And so I think, the challenge, if I'm getting $500,000 a year, I don't want to spend it frivolously. I want to
Mhm.
spend it on things that are going to keep camp going after it ends, right?
Mhm.
So I want to be you use the term steward, Jess, and we talk about that here at Pearce Williams, the idea that we're stewards of this property at this moment in time.
Mhm.
And 10 years from now, when you think through it, you're hoping, I would hope that I would choose to make decisions that would benefit the people who are 10 years away from me or 20 years away from me, so that the life of this donation or series of donations keeps giving and becomes a legacy.
It reminds me of it's impacting your camper's camper.
Yeah,
That's
today's
I was
camper's camper.
just about to say that. Yep.
Yeah. No, that is such a sticky phrase once you know the concept of today's camper's camper, which if this is a first episode people are listening to, today's camper's camper is a concept that if you have a camper who is coming to camp at the age of 7, let's say they have kids at 27, so that's 20 years from now, and their child, when they turn 7, can come to camp. So 27 years from now, are we making the choices where today's camper's camper is going to have a beneficial camp experience at your facility or in your organization?
I thought about that. I live in Chicago, and in Chicago, there are these historic 2 flats. Okay. So it's like you go in the front door and there's an apartment that's upstairs and then there's a duplex, and most of them have garages. And our house had a 1-car garage and every single other house had 2-car garages. And so we finally, and it was falling apart. So we were looking to get a new garage. And when we were putting it in, I suggested us putting in a 220-volt plug. And we had the discussion of, well, why? And, I said, well, we don't have an electric car right now, but I assume in the next 10 to 20 years, we will. And it will cost so much more money to put it in after it's built than to do it ahead of time. And so that's kind of like one of those things where you need to think, like, yeah, I want the party doors. I want all these things. But actually what I need, what is the practical thing that we will be happy about later, is a way to charge our car when we get an electric vehicle.
Yeah. Proactive versus reactive, right?
Yep.
Completely.
And just forcing ourselves to live in that mental time travel future, right? To be somewhere else and think through, because it's easy enough. Like for me, I think if somebody came forward tomorrow and said, we're going to give you $500,000 every year, that's a different scenario than 10 years from now, even, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are risks to a scenario like this, right? Because what happens, one of the big risks would be that maybe your other donors don't see the need to give if you're getting such a large donation. One of the risks could be that your internal people are more tempted to commit some sort of fraud, even, not saying they will, but, if we with every scenario, you want to look at the risks as well as the positive. There's a lot of positive to a grant like this, to an idea like this.
Summer camp directors, listen up. What if I told you there was a magical tool that could transform your camp scheduling chaos into a breeze? Introducing Campify, a camp scheduling platform making scheduling as fun as camp itself. Before you hit skip, hear us out. Campify isn't just another app, it's your new secret weapon to conquer scheduling chaos. Camps across North America wish they tried it sooner, and none would ever go back to scheduling the old-fashioned way. Every camp is unique, and it has its own special quirks. Campify gets that, and it works and thinks for you. It builds schedules based on rules that you set, and Campify offers much more than group scheduling. Campify's elective module gives campers personalized schedules. Say goodbye to last-minute changes causing scrambling and confusion. Campify's staff mobile app updates schedules in real time. Your time is valuable. Let Campify save you hours and make the scheduling effortless. Bring your camp into the future and discover the smarter way to schedule. Visit campify.io/campahead to schedule a demo. Create a free trial and claim 10% off your first year's license.
What are some of your positives, KJ?
Yeah, I mean, there is the big positive of the money, right? That's a positive. The positive of consistency, I think, is huge.
Oh, can't be understated. Cannot be
right?
understated.
The positive of potential, and potential in so many ways, potential of growth, potential of programming, potential of whatever it might be. I think potential is the key word for me of when it comes to, big donations like this, is the
And
potential.
what I love is that you immediately went to your 4S's, KJ, and right. And that's where, and I don't know about you, Jess, but there are lots of camps who don't have a centering document or a centering thing that they think about. And KJ, it was great because you immediately were like, hey, we do these 4S's. And this is how I would think that let's do safety first. That's where scenario planning helps, because you're like, oh yeah, let's aim towards that future where we do that first.
Yeah. And I think when, if there is a large gift, and I've talked about this, is like, you go back to your mission, right? So if the mission of my organization is to support and advocate for the ministry and vitality of Episcopal camp and conference centers.
Yeah.
How is a yearly gift of $500,000 going to impact the work we do? And when I'm thinking about ideas, or the board is thinking about ideas, or the staff, if we do X, does that hit the heart of our mission or the values? If your camp has a mission or values or a vision, you want those to be in line, because that's at the heart of who you are as an entity. And so that I think that always has to be in the back of your mind, almost in the rearview mirror. You're still going forward, but you know where you've been, and you know that kind of helps you move forward.
And I think in the world of camping, where full-time leadership staff tends to be smaller teams, is your whole team aligned in that mission, aligned in those values, and aligned in, what this money is going to go towards. And if not, then that's a conversation you need to have way before this even happens, right?
And that can't be understated either. The fact that your team all has to be on the same bus, right? Pulling in the same direction, going in the same direction. I actually did future scenario work with my team last week. Just a simple 20-minute exercise about 2034 and what that looks like for Pearce Williams, because where should we start aiming now if we're going towards those futures? And, something like this that's a positive and something to note, that you need your team pulling in the same direction, because if they're not, then you're going to fight over that, or that could lead to stresses that don't exist currently. And money often leads to stress. It leads to stress when you don't have it, and it leads to stress when you have it. It's one of the things I would encourage camps and would hope that camps would have in 10 years. And it's funny that we've started it now. We have a real estate board of our ideas up for people to see. And so, yeah, I would just look at that donation and be like, okay, what order do these things happen in? What's our future plan for all of these things? How do we move forward with getting shovels in the ground on these projects?
And I think in the world we live in now, transparency is so important about that too,
Mhm.
right? Like not even just with your board and with your staff, but I think about, my job is to take care of the summer staff. My job is not what do we do with $500,000 every year. And when my boss, my CEO can come talk to me about it, and then I can strategically, right,
Mhm.
have a transparent conversation with my team about it. I think that leads to a better community and a better
Mhm.
environment across the board.
Yeah.
But being transparent with putting your money where your mouth is and being
Mhm.
transparent with what that means.
It makes me think about how does fundraising change?
Mm,
In my brain,
Mm.
we
Mhm.
spend, you know, at the end of the year, most nonprofits bring in 30% of their income in the end of the year. And so it is a very stressful time. Many nonprofits, many camps, I'm working every single day for the rest of the I will try not to work on Christmas and be with my family and obviously obligations, but I have to make sure that the bills are paid and things like that. And I think, what would fundraising look like if I had that in there? And I wonder about fundraising becoming, in my brain, it's saying it's more of storytelling versus asking and dreaming, which we should be storytelling anyways when we're fundraising. But I think it would give more permission to celebrate the accomplishments because maybe it feels like they need to be bigger. And maybe when you have more money, it's bigger. But I think it would really start to change the way in which we ask for money and the way in which we share what we have done.
And this specifically is what talking through scenarios gets, because now we're talking about, okay, well, how does that change fundraising if we
Right.
get this amount?
mhm.
And it's funny because at the beginning, I'd written down the phrase, money isn't scarce, vision is scarce.
Yep.
And I was at the Campfire Collective conference at Zephyr Point in Nevada. And one of the closing keynote speakers, he said, listen, money isn't scarce, vision is scarce, right? And I think that this goes to this idea that the what if of getting a donation of $500,000, part of that when we're analyzing this is what would lead up to that, right? Like
Right. It doesn't come out of the sky.
the
Right.
stories are what lead up
Mhm.
to that. The having the vision and putting it front and center and saying, here's our plans, right? Like choose to be with us or choose not to be with us. Those are your
Mhm.
choices. The fact that, a huge portion of nonprofits, right? And I thought about that earlier. A huge portion of nonprofits try to raise so much money at this time of year. The reality is I'm hoping that not just nonprofits are listening to this, but private camps are listening to this.
Mhm.
And what if you had a donor who you can't give, set aside the tax receipting and all of those things, but like, what if you had someone invest that much money every year and expected, free for a private camp? And one of the things that the three of us, even if you're not in a upper leadership position yet, we know that there's budgets that we follow. And Travis from Go Camp Pro and would say he was shocked when he started in consulting how many private camps simply don't create a budget. They just run camp.
It's nuts. Nuts.
And so this is the idea of, right, a donation or an investment like this in your facility on a consistent basis. Oh, look, you got dinner. That's awesome. My daughter is also cooking me dinner right now.
My 4-year-old just brought in a toy salad.
That's awesome. But like if you have that kind of investment in a private camp facility, what does that allow you to do? Right. And here's the other thing. And this is awesome about scenario planning. It keeps bringing up other thoughts. One of the things I have is that so many camps tend to try to keep up with the Joneses, right? Like, oh, this other camp has this thing, I should get this thing, right? Or this other thing does, right? And so when you're in that mindset, it doesn't allow you to look further afield to figure out what makes you very different than anyone else. And to use an investment or a donation like this in a way that will set your site apart or help camping. Because in my mind, it's not that I'm trying to be better than any other camp. I'm just trying to pull all camps up and make sure we're all good.
Well, and if you think about North America, there are tens of thousands of camps. And they've been around since, I can think of the longest, oldest still running camp is Incarnation Center in Connecticut, but hundreds of years. And why are they still existing? Because of the magic of camp, because people are being formed and transformed in a way that impacts their life and helps them with the soft skills that they're not learning or getting anywhere else. And so I think that if we can think about that and we can lift up other camps, the money is out there, and we need to tell our story. And we can get that $500,000. But we can't be afraid to ask for it because we are so afraid to ask. And we can't be afraid to say, here's the idea I have and why I think it's important.
This is the beauty of scenario planning, is you start talking about one thing and it gets you to so many other points. And one other thing when you're analyzing any scenario is, looking at the positives, looking at the risks, but also making sure when you find a future that you're like, oh, that's the future that I would most want to exist, then start putting some concrete plans in the ground to move your organization in that direction 10 years before that, right? So telling your story now will lead towards more good in the future. What else could you do? What else could people do now if they wanted to move towards that future? What are some other thoughts people have?
I think some easy things that you can do are to ask returning campers, why are you coming back? To ask staff members, maybe who were campers, why do you want to be on staff? And learn from the people who, I think as an executive director, I'm not there in the quote unquote in the trenches all the time. And so I want to know from the people who are experiencing it, what is the why for you? Because you can be giving a speech or a sermon or a homily, and you're saying one thing, and someone will come up to you and say, thank you so much for saying X, Y, Z. And you're like, I didn't say that. Because everybody has a different experience, right? And so if we can go and we can ask our parents, why do you send your kid to camp blank? Ask the staff, why do you keep coming back? Ask the campers, and you'll start to get a story or a blueprint of really what's going on. And I think that that's a great starting place, and it's not going to cost millions of dollars to do.
No, it's not. And I think that engaging stakeholders is a super important part to any of this in the future. I also love the idea of the ideas that come from thinking like this, like the fact that if you had that kind of guaranteed donation every year, one of the things you could actually do is hold a weekend for your alumni that was all about fundraising, right? So that they could continue to grow that and not just say, well, that's enough, right? And I think that's the story I would tell is, for the number of kids in this world, it's never enough. We need more, and here's how we're going to use that to do good in the world.
Yeah. I was just having this conversation with someone this past week about every camp has their own thing, right? And everyone has their own special tradition, whatever it may be. But in hindsight, we're all essentially doing the same things. Most of us are canoeing and kayaking and doing archery and, going on hikes or adventure packing or whatever it is. Most of us across the board are doing something pretty similar. So how are you amplifying the programs that you do have instead of building new ones? And if you want to build new ones, great, but your other ones better be top tier by the time you're building new ones. So what are we doing to amplify what we're doing as individuals in order to keep camp moving forward, camp ahead, right? What are we doing at that level to keep pushing forward?
No, for sure. So many times in the world of grants and things, you have to create a new program to get a grant.
Sure.
And this is where I'm like, listen, I don't want to create a new program. I just want to make my programs amazing.
Yep.
And I think that something like this in the future, that would guarantee that you could focus on, I think for us, we would focus on what we do really well. And if you ask the stakeholders, you can have some of these stories from the past. So one year a parent came back and said, oh, welcome back to camp. She's like, yeah, we didn't send our kids last year. We let them choose this other camp. But then this year I was like, which camp do you want to go to? Pierce Williams or Camp XYZ? And they're like, oh, I liked Camp XYZ, but I want to go back to Pierce Williams. And the mom was like, well, why? And she goes, well, because it just feels like home. And you're like, great. That's a story we can tell, right? Like community is a donation or an investment like this happens because of who you are. It's not just going to come out of nowhere. As we said earlier, it happens because you have created a community that people can believe in and people want to be part of. And so how can you move towards that future? And how do we tell other camps how to move towards that future?
Yeah. I think especially with this and, fundraising, grant, all of that is so scary to people. And it's a lot of paperwork and it's a lot of XYZ. And I think what I'm hearing us, sort of talk about it's telling the story. It's the connections, the community, and it's the core memories, right? I know people who have memories from when they were 7 or 8, their first summer at camp, and it changed their life. And, I also know people who went to camp when they were 7 or 8 and had a terrible time. And I think learning from those things, and also if you have a camper who had a terrible time at your camp, learn from it, have a conversation. In the theater world, we're taught to crave criticism because it only makes us better. And I know that in the camp world, we can get feedback that maybe doesn't make us better because it's given out of sheer emotion from a parent, but every opportunity is an opportunity to learn and grow. Every one of those conversations. And even when you have a camper who has a bad experience, being able to have a conversation helps with that relationship and it can help repair harm. It could also, there can be misconceptions or things that happen. And so any kind of conversation will help your camp.
And utilizing everybody on camp as an ally, right? Not only just your campers, but your parents, your health staff, your kitchen team, your maintenance guy, like your counselors, every single person that walks onto that camp is an ally, and providing them with the same experience or same sense of beautiful nostalgia that carries on, and that creates legacy and tradition and commitment going forward.
And I think that is, when you say everyone when I do some future scenario planning with my team, having the maintenance guy in the same room as my office manager, as my guest services, as my fundraiser, you start to see patterns in what people are thinking about now. And as an executive director, it can help you realize where their mind is at in today and how they see 10 years from now looks for them. The other thing I wonder about, and it's not just this current scenario, but I wonder if you give your team at your camp or facility or association give them the ability to input into these ideas and future scenarios, will those staff choose to stay longer because you start to move towards it and you talk about it and it's an idea that they become more invested in?
Yep. Everyone wants to be a part of a legacy, right? Everyone wants to leave their thumbprint somewhere.
Yeah. Well, I think that for us, this scenario has been the positive scenario, and we chose to do a positive scenario. In the show notes, I have put 10 things to think through that ChatGPT gave us about this. So you can find those in the show notes. And you can use these 10 things to think through any scenario, be it a positive one, like a major donation, or be it a very struggling one, like your camp has to move because it's in a floodplain now that climate change has happened and climate disasters are happening, right? And you're like, okay, well, what's that impact? Our operational impacts, our financial impacts, programmatic, and that's in the list of 10 things. I think the other thing I would note from this conversation, and you two can tell me if I'm off base, but having other people to bounce ideas off when you're talking through a scenario is super important.
Mm-hmm.
Huge.
Yeah, I think also it gets us to, my brain might be going 45 degrees this way, and KJ's brain is going 45 degrees this way, and Joe's is going 45 degrees another way, and we hit on things that were out of our periphery, but now we've opened up and there's so much more to play with. And so because we all have different experiences, we're all from a little bit different generation, and so we all bring a unique perspective. And that is something that you talked about when you're talking about bringing in your entire staff, because everyone on your staff is an expert in their area, right? Your maintenance person knows how to do a million things that other people don't know how to do, right? Your kitchen manager, your chef knows how to do things that other people can't do the way they do it. So bringing folks together to take the blinders off and really have that 360 view of what's going on is something I'm really appreciating about this small group. And I'm imagining having what would happen if you had a bigger group to have those conversations with.
And I think maybe they don't even have to be camp people, right? Like, it can be anybody, because they're going to have, again, like Jess said, a different perspective. And there is so much benefit to getting out of that echo chamber and having so many different perspectives come together.
Different people from your community, different stakeholders, but also different. What I appreciate about this discussion, and what I think I would, if I was to guide, I see this as a great session at a camping conference, right? A couple of hours in a future scenario with like 20 people from different facilities across the world. It just is going to bring a different perspective, because they might think about something that you simply is not anywhere on your radar because of their facility, their location, their past personal history as well. So this list of 10 things is great. And it talks about that analyzing. And I think that do you two have closing thoughts on this?
I think if you're working on, you've come up with your factors, you've started coming up with a scenario, and you're trying to analyze it, but you get stuck, phone a friend. I think that's one of the biggest things that you can do in this work. Well, one, don't do it alone. But if you are, phone a friend.
Excellent.
Yeah. And we've said it a million times, and I feel like we're going to say it a million more times as we go through this podcast, is dream big and think outside the box.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Who knows? Anything could happen. And that's what scenario planning is anything could happen.
Yeah. And I love to bring back up we happen to be stewards of the property at this moment in time, right? And 10 years from now, when we think through a scenario, we want to be thinking ahead from there as well, be it a positive or a negative. And how can't people 99 times out of 99 are positive people. And it's, but also 99 times out of 100, they're stuck. A lot of them are stuck on the day-to-day operations of their facility.
Yeah.
And don't have the time or the foresight to think about the future in the same way that we are here in this group, and that they might. I will drop there's a PDF. I'm holding it up to the screen. Did I talk about this? The 7.
No.
Mm-mm.
So this is 7 steps towards becoming a future ready organization. This is a white paper, a PDF put out by the Institute for the Future. I have a board meeting in a couple of hours, and I first read from this last year as a part of the opening of the board meetings reading. And I was rereading it last week, and I'm going to do it again. In fact, every December, I'm going to reread this paper, because you want to be a future ready organization. I think that's what this podcast is about. That's why I've sat in so many meetings where I'm like, what we really need to do is think about the future, but where people are so worried about today. or their place or what they have, right? And what they don't want to lose. I'll put a link to this. I need to find the PDF, but I'll put a link will be in the show notes for sure.
So the really great acronym that I'm sure we all know, maybe not, and that's okay, about identifying all of these factors, right? When we're analyzing a scenario, the SWOT acronym,
Mhm.
the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And essentially in the show notes, that's what all these are, right? Identifying what types of implications, what types of opportunities, recognizing the threats, prioritizing all your actions, all of those things. But if you can keep in mind the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, that is the model to analyze scenarios.
Excellent. Well, for today, I think that's going to do it for us. On the next episode, episode 5, we'll be talking about early warning signals and strategic flexibility. What happens when you see a scenario actually starting to come true, and how can you adjust to it from there? Ooh. Jess, where can people find out more about you?
And you can find out more about me at episcopalccc.org. My email is jess@episcopalccc.org. And I'm also on all of the social medias.
Awesome. KJ?
Yeah, we are at phantomlakymca.org, Instagram, Facebook, all that fun stuff. And then you can get a hold of me at kj@phantomlakymca.org.
That's awesome. And you can find all about Pearce Williams at campisbetter.com is our website. And on social media, anywhere that matters, we're at Camp is Better. And you can find out about us there. Thanks so much for being with us for Camp Ahead this week. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to Camp Ahead, exploring the futurology of the summer camp industry. Don't forget to check out our contact information and show notes at gocamp.pro/campahead. Camp Ahead is part of the Go Camp Pro podcast network. Find a podcast for camp pros of every age and stage at gocamp.pro/podcast. Hey Camp Pros, we love that our industry is built on sharing. In order to foster that spirit, we ask that whenever you get something great from a conference session, one of these podcasts, from the Camp Pros group on Facebook, wherever else, that you give credit where credit is due. That way, people can feel comfortable about sharing their best practices and continue to make all of our camps better. Thanks so much.